Okay. It is, yes. Okay, great. So, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to ERIAC, the European Roma Institute for Arts and Culture. It is our pleasure to welcome you today in this event called Peripheries Unite, Cultural Resistance, Social Justice, and the Potential of Alliances Across Movements in Europe. Today is the May 16th. It's a very special day, the Day of Roma Resistance, a day that has been celebrated for some decades now around Europe. And Roma Resistance is inspired in one single event, in the uprising that took place in the family camp in the Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration camp. And this is one of the very few recorded uprisings in concentration camps during the Second World War, and it has become a symbol, and a whole movement has been built around the notion of agency, resistance, resilience. And this is a day, today, when we celebrate the strength, also the agency, the ingenuity of our ancestors, but also of our brothers and sisters in the face of oppression today. And it's a day that's, there's many activities happening around Europe and also in Berlin on this day. So I imagine that there is many people in many different events today as well. And we thought that as we celebrate agency and resilience and strength in the face of oppression, we want to give space to reflection. Because we realize that we as Roma, unfortunately, are not the only people who face oppression, who face systemic injustice, who face racism, discrimination, and violence. Even though Europe is built on this identity of equality, on this premise of non-discrimination, of justice, equality for all has not crystallized, has not materialized, and discrimination and racism in Europe is such a burning issue in the EU that Europe has to devise its own anti-racism action plan to try to create or step up some type of activities and systemic actions against that. So as we realize that other minorities, other subaltern, other communities which are considered at the periphery, like the Roma, face similar challenges, we thought that it's a good idea to come together and to reflect, to see what are the things that we share, what are the parallel movements that our communities have created. And over decades, as we have been, as communities, as individuals, standing up to injustice, we have devised these separate civic movements, social movements. We also use different strategies, among them cultural resistance, to build communities, to increase our agency, and also to try to influence the majority that unfortunately creates a structure in which we face violence, discrimination, and racism. So today's discussion is a public debate hosted by ERIAC and is part of a project called ERIAC for EU. This event today is part of a public discussion series entitled Promoting European Values Through Cultural Heritage of ERIAC for EU project, the ERIAC network to advance Roma inclusion by combating and preventing anti-Gypsyism in the EU. We have two fantastic guests with us. We're very excited to have both of you. Let me just introduce formally our speakers here with your bios. And also just a reminder to the audience that this event is recorded, and we have photographs as well. This is for the purpose of documentation, and also for being able to multiply the impact and having others enjoy this discussion today. So sitting on my right, we have Emilia Roig, author and scholar and director of the Center for Intersectional Justice. Emilia is a non-fiction author and political scientist. Her best-selling book, Why We Matter, The End of Oppression, was published in 2021, and her upcoming book, The End of Marriage, For a Revolution of Love, was released already this year. She's an author of numerous books, and she's also the founder of the Center for Intersectional Justice, a non-profit organization that advocates for justice, equality, and lives free from systemic oppression for all. Emilia is dedicated to inspiring people to divest from systems of oppression and to shift collective consciousness. She has taught at universities in France, Germany, and the US on intersectionality theory, post-colonial studies, critical race theory, queer feminism, and international and European law. After earning a Master of Public Policy and an MBA in International Law, she also completed her PhD in Political Science at the Humboldt University in Sciences Po in France. She was a jury member of the German Nonfiction Prize in 2020 and was appointed Ashoka Fellow in 2019 and received the Edition F Award in 2021, and she was elected Most Influential Woman of the Year in the Impact of Diversity Award in 2022. So thank you, Emilia, for joining us.
Thank you so much.
And we have also with us, sitting with us, Tayo Awosusi-Onutor, singer and activist and Board of Directors of RomaniPhen. Tayo is a singer, a writer, a director, an activist, and a voice actor. She lives in Berlin and describes herself as Afro-Sinteța. She studied German and multimedia and is a board member of RomaniPhen, a feminist Romani archive, and member of INI Romnia. She's interested in education, history, and the civil rights movement. In 2017, she released the documentary Pralmende Wir über uns, a film portraying the perspectives of Sinti and Roma in Germany. In 2021, her first children's book, Jokesi Klub Jeg Duidrin, Drei Freundinnen in Berlin, was published. Thank you. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you.
So I prepared a few questions for us to kick off the discussion, but we'll also very much welcome questions from the audience. We'll have around an hour to discuss, enjoy your company, and then we will be following up with the formal opening of our new exhibition, the Spring Salon. Please stay with us after the discussion, because we'll have to just pick up the chairs, and we'll invite you to some drinks and some snacks, and then we'll also have the pleasure of sitting here with the artists present and with a guided tour of the exhibition. So without further ado, let me just go quickly to the questions. This is not easy, sorry. Too many papers for us today. Okay. So, Emilia, I would like to start with a question for you. As a founder of the Center for Intersectional Justice, I would like to invite you to share with us, what does intersectionality teach us about the nature of discrimination and oppression, and what does it teach us about the potential of alliances?
So first of all, thank you for the invitation. I'm happy to be here in such an intimate round. It's also really nice. So I don't want to say that it's, you mentioned at the beginning, many people are in different places, but I think we underestimate as well the power of like small places. So I just wanted to say that. And then secondly, intersectionality. What does intersectionality tell us about oppression? Basically, it tells us that it's complex. It tells us that it's that it has multiple layers, and it tells us that any form of simplification can reinforce oppression. So, if we look at oppression from a single axis, we run the risk of amplifying one aspect over the others, and then by doing so, by reinforcing other forms of discrimination. So, I give an example. If we look at women's rights as a single issue topic, right? So it's an issue that has to do with gender. Instead of, if we do that and do not add other aspects which relate to racism or class or religion or disability or any other factors or sexual orientation, what we do is that we leave it, or at least we leave the possibility of it being instrumentalized. For example, the instrumentalization of feminism for right-wing purposes, by saying, okay, we need to save women in Afghanistan, we need to save women from the Muslim world because they're being, their rights are being disrespected there. And by doing so, it's about it is instrumentalizing racism and women's rights for oppression purposes in the end. And so what we're seeing is that an intersectional lens is not a luxury. It's not something that is a plus. It's a necessity. It's impossible to have, or at least to fight capitalism, or to fight racism and colonialism, or to fight patriarchy independently from each other. So any form of activism that is not geared towards the dismantlement of all those three systems simultaneously is bound to reinforce one of them. So I like to speak about it as a monster with three heads, right? And so if you're trying to kill one head, the monster is not going to be killed at all. It's going to regenerate at some point, and like the two heads are going to grow bigger. And so what is important to do, even if it's a very violent allegory, but what I like to describe it this way, because they're dependent on each other. Capitalism thrives on hierarchies. Capitalism thrives on racism. It thrives on the patriarchy, and vice versa.
And what does it tell us about alliances?
Yeah, thank you. Well, what it tells us is that, for example, if I give the example of feminism being instrumentalized for right-wing purposes, if we have alliances between feminism, between feminists and between anti-racist groups, something like that cannot happen, right? So it's really about identifying systems and also the historicity of systems, and making sure that that we're looking at systems instead of looking at identities. And if we do so, then alliances and coalitions can flourish. Alliances and coalitions can focus on a system to dismantle instead of looking at the specificities of each identity. And so that's why intersectionality invites us to tackle the systems which produce our identities. We're not women or Roma or Black or lesbian just by virtue of nature. We're these things because systems of oppression have defined certain identities as the norm and other identities as the deviation of from this norm. And so if we adopt an intersectional lens, if we adopt an intersectional perspective, it enables us to not focus on these very identities and looking at, okay, I am Roma and I'm Black and you're Roma, and so that's why, looking at who experiences oppression more than the other, rather than this, looking at, okay, what do we have in common? What is the system that is affecting us, affecting the two of us in our communities? It's not about us as persons, but it's affecting our communities. And then we come down to white supremacy very clearly. Right? And that's the same if we look at Muslim people, if we look at Jewish people, it all boils down to white supremacy in this sense. And that's the same with the patriarchy. If we look at, okay, what are the systems that we're fighting? It's not about being woman, being trans, being non-binary, being lesbian, or being straight. What we're looking at is, what are the system? What is the system that we're fighting? And it's going to be patriarchy plus other systems of oppression. Capitalism and colonialism, racism.
That's quite a powerful premise as a potential for building alliances. When we look, what you describe is really a collective and more macro lens, and I'd like to explore this potential of alliances in a micro lens, in a real life, actually. And I have a question for you, Tai, about this, because as an Afro-Synthesa, you navigate both identities, right? So you somehow embody, if I may say so, an alliance of identities that are, separate, that are distinct, that are seen also by the society as distinct. So I'd like to ask you to share with us maybe the experience, your experience of navigating these identities, and also what have you learned with working for and with both the Roma and the Afro-German movement?
Yes, also from my side, thank you very much for the invitation, and I'm happy to be here with all of you on this early evening. I can really connect with what Emilia just said. With when I'm answering a question, when it comes to like how do I see it, it's actually the question is actually in how am I being described, because that's actually how my journey of identity, of empowerment, self-empowerment, and also the journey of realizing that everything that I am and I do in my work is political, even if it's just music. Yeah. So I realized very early that I am being like described as this or that, and that this was actually not my choice, right? So my choice is just to be me. So when I realized that I'm being described, I realized that it was less necessary for me to to take the mic, so to say, and and to describe myself. So this is why I came up with that term Afro-Synthesa, because I'm also part of that Afro-German movement, even though I'm not like white German, but I'm still German because I'm born and raised here, and I have ancestors that have been living in Germany for more than 600 years. So yes, I do feel I'm part of Germany in some kind of way, sometimes not. But so I felt it was necessary for me to describe myself, so I can really like set the tone, and so that I can be the one who describes myself, and I'm not being described. So I didn't choose it. It was just I didn't choose who I am, but I chose to use what I am in my work, no matter if it's musical work, if it's political work, and I think I was able, or I'm trying to make both sides visible. When I'm more active in the Black community, I'm also trying to talk about subjects that concern the Romani and Sinti communities, and the other way around. So I think, and also sometimes I like to use my music when I'm on stage, because of course, first of all, we all go by what we see, and if people see me, they see like a Black, light-skinned woman, and they don't imagine that I'm also part of the Romani community. So I realized that through music, which is accessible and easy for everybody to perceive, I can use that to make people think, while they're feeling good, because the music, usually makes you feel good, and you're moving, and then all of a sudden I sing something in Romanes and talk about the lyrics, and the lyrics are, they have a certain meaning. I'm talking about the persecution history of our people. I'm talking about empowerment. I'm talking about what can we do against oppression. How can we empower ourselves? How riches are our cultures and stuff like that. And while you're dancing to the beat. So I think, I'm just trying to use the tools that I was given to work with, to connect and to make certain subjects visible at places where they're usually not visible. Because this is something that I have experienced in my life, and I'm still experiencing it. Because usually, like I said before, people don't think that I belong to both communities, and both communities have things in common. But at the same time, of course, there's also differences. And at the same time, we can learn a lot from each other by making things visible, by coming together, and also through, solidarity, of course.
Yeah, I think that's really powerful, of the work that you do, being able to really navigate both spaces and using the different gifts, as you said, that you have received. That's really, I really think that's really powerful. I'd like to pick up one theme that kind of came up in both of your speeches, which is that about the majority, the white supremacy, and basically the system of oppression in which we function. Now that we have been, working a lot with the topic of anti-Gypsyism, which was also, many decades of struggle of trying to really make institutions, member states, and the society at large make them realize that the racism that we as Roma suffer is really the problem of the majority, right? Because of the prejudice, because the really deeply ingrained attitudes and bias. And hate, really, that resides in these institutions and individuals that are combined by the society. So if we think about the racism as, in fact, a problem of the white majority, how can we work with the majority to fight prejudice, but also to encourage empathy, to encourage critical examining of history, of looking into, the archives, into, dismantling the systems or structures of oppression and of power, ultimately. So is there a structure or a strategy that we could use to really target that white supremacist society in which, you know, we have to navigate as those that have been put at the periphery?
So first of all, we need to understand what white supremacy is, and I think there's a misunderstanding about what it is. White supremacy is portrayed as an opinion. You know, it's like an opinion, it's a marginal opinion that people have, and it's not seen as an organizing principle of our global society, but it is. White supremacy is the defining line between the human and the subhuman, and it's also the standard of human superiority with regards to intelligence, to beauty, to rationality, to language, to culture. So it defines human superiority. And so that's something that we grew up with, all of us, with this idea of there's a superior human, there's a superior culture, a superior language, a superior physical traits that define beauty. And we have internalized it so deeply that we do not see it as something that is not natural, right? It comes off as something natural, something that is given, you know, a given, basically, that shouldn't be questioned. And white supremacy has been established by science. And I think that's so important to underline it, because white supremacy was present even before the Enlightenment, the period of the Enlightenment, but science has played a very important role in creating human superiority and human inferiority through medicine, through biology, through anthropology, ethnology, etc. And so that's why white supremacy is ingrained in our scientific world, in what we consider to be knowledge and objective knowledge. And yes, of course, today we would say, well, no, because, you know, scientific racism has been abolished, or, you know, we've recognized that scientific racism was a mistake. But I would say not really. There hasn't been a day where we said, okay, this was all wrong. And here as well with the creation of the inferiority of the woman, you know, the female body as an inferior body. This hasn't been said, or to be wrong, actually, or the binary, the gender binary as being actually an invention that is not rooted in biology, that is not rooted in objective science. And so that's why when you ask what should we do to involve, or at least to mobilize the white majority, I think there needs to be a recognition of what white supremacy has done to our society, what it has done to us as people, to our self-perception, how we perceive ourselves, but how we perceive others as well. And the problem with this is that there is tremendous resistance from the white majority in recognizing this fact, simply because if we do so, if we recognize how white supremacy has been invested in our institutions, in every aspect of our societies, then we need to rebuild societies. We can't continue like that. We need to redefine power. We need to redefine, or at least we need to redistribute power. We need to change the definition of what success and failure is, of what wealth means, where it comes from, etc., etc. And so that's why the resistance is resistance towards change and towards breaking a status quo that is very beneficial for the white majority. So that's why I think I would be very careful in discourses that say, oh, we need to just be open, we need to, we need to be more tolerant. It's not about tolerance only. I mean, of course it is about tolerance, but it's about so much more than that. And that's why we cannot rely entirely on the white majority or on dominant groups for that matter. You know, if we want to dismantle homophobia, we can't rely on the heterosexual majority. If we want to dismantle white supremacy, we cannot rely on the white majority. If we want to dismantle the patriarchy, we cannot rely on cis men. And that's why it's really important to re-own, or at least to own and reclaim the power of marginalized communities, knowing that change has always originated from there, right? So people who say, oh, in patriarchy, we need to involve men more, or we need to involve white people more. We don't need to. We can. And that's great if they do. But if we see it as a need and as something that is absolutely essential in the success of these struggles, then we're lost because we give them way more power than they already have. And so it's more about unlocking the power of marginalized group by knowing we are part of this relational power dynamic, right? So at least in white supremacy, white people have a lot of power because we give it to them too. Not only because of this, but because we also believe in it. In patriarchy, cis men have a lot of power in the institution because also women give it to them. And so it's about a paradigmatic shift, about really realizing, okay, what is the power that we have? How can we regain that power?
Yeah, I think especially today on the Romani Resistance Day, if we think about that, and if we go back from today to back then, and yeah, I think almost every time I kind of like pass this area of the memorial, I always have to think, you know, about the history, like how about that part of the history, and then the connection to today, because you know, for most people, it's like a memorial that they might visit, but you know, for us, it's part of our history, it's part of our family history, and I think that if I look at like my parents' generation, and especially my mother, who was and is still part of also the political movement of Romani and Sinti people in Germany, I just have to like remind myself again that the recognition of the genocide actually happened because our people fought for it, and if they wouldn't have done that, Lord knows how the situation would be today. So it was not that like the German government says, oh wow, we forgot about the Romani people, let's recognize them or something. No, it was because our people still had a strength, and this is something that I really, really deeply admire, because we all know what this part of the history has done to our families and all the trauma and all that is still existing until today. But at the same time, there was still so much power in the community to do these things, to make this political work, and to fight for this kind of achievement for their elders, but also for us today and for our children and also their children. So I think that this is really crucial, that the fact that we can be active and we can make a change. We have to make a change, and it's actually the power that lies in our communities. Even though we're being oppressed since centuries, there's still so much power and so much movement and so much development that has achieved a lot today. And today we can, with organizations, Romani organizations, we can do some kind of different work. Like back then, like the generations before us, they really had to fight for the recognition of the genocide and had to deal with all that stuff. And because they did so, today we can do other work, and we can focus on empowerment, and we could focus on producing and building things, art, literature, work, projects, and everything that will have and has a lot of positive influence on our people. So I think that's very, very, very important, and something that we also have to give to the younger generation so that they can continue, because I think that's really where the change is. Because I would love that day to come that you just mentioned, but I also doubt it somehow. So I think it's really on us, and it's really also on coming together and connecting, like all like marginalized communities, to come together more and to connect more, to work together more. And then if there are also people from the majority society that want to support that, that's even better. Fine, great.
Well, I do agree with both of you, and I think there's something really empowering and very inspiring in the reflection or the realization that actually it's on us, right? That there is a leverage, that there is capacity of resistance, and also the resources that come with our presence, with our struggle, with our minds, with, you know, the power of the community, really. And I think that it's also huge responsibility, of course, but this is a process which needs to be produced, right? I mean, something that we cannot, it will not be given, right? It's something that we have to fight for. And part of that process really is that of speaking back, right? So if we have been placed at the periphery, we have been put outside of the center where the power lies, or where the cards are being shuffled and distributed, right? So we have to go back to the center, we have to speak back. And that's also about reclaiming, about reowning, reappropriating things that have been taken or imposed, you know, and reframing maybe some of the society's stigma or labels that have been put on us. And I'm wondering that if we're doing this process of speaking back, right, of trying to gain our confidence, right, and go back to reclaim what's ours, how does that process look in both of your fields and your lives? You work in the field of scholarship, of the Academia of Knowledge Production. That's a really big one to tackle, one which we can also relate to. And Tayo, you also on the side of the arts, I mean, you mentioned this already, but I wonder whether there is a process in the cultural field, in music specifically, that you also try to reclaim, reown, and do this kind of process of speaking back to the center.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. When I answered the question as an artist, as a singer, as a musician, as a female singer, also, then I have to say that I also have to fight for the place that I have. It's not like the world has been waiting for a Tayo or something. That's not really. Yeah, you probably have tonight, but I think that's not really how it is out there, because I really think that that there are like also differences when it comes to when we talk about like the musical field, or as an artist, a musical artist. Is always a difference if you're a male or a female artist. That's a very big difference. I just posted an article about that on my Instagram channel the other day for Mother's Day, because I really make a lot of those kind of experiences that as a woman, also as a mother, you get treated different, right? Like if there's like one of my male colleagues that has to bring the child to the sound check because there's no childcare, obviously, then everybody's like, wow, he's such a great dad. He's even taking the child to the sound check. If I would bring my child to sound check, everybody's like, oh my God, now she brought the child. How's that gonna work? Is the performance is the baby gonna cry while she's singing? What's going on? You know, all that. So this is like one thing that happens, or one reality that actually exists out there. And then at the same time, I'm also, as an artist, being put like in certain like boxes, like certain expectation when it comes to like musical style, for instance. Like, okay, which is the style that I can perform, and which style is really not expected. And then all of a sudden it's like out of the box, like, ooh, what's going on, stuff like that. So I think by like claiming a space and just, you know, trying to perform on stage, and doing this in different languages, in English, also in German, also in Romanes. I think I'm just trying to take up more space, actually, and the space that I like to take. And I think by doing that, I'm probably reclaiming space. I think probably.
Absolutely.
So I guess, yes, I am working in the field of academia, but I feel like I've taken my distance from it. First of all, because the books that I've written are not academic books. They correspond to some extent to some of the canons of the academia. For example, the way I quote references and all of this. So they're like popular, no, not popular in the English sense, sorry, but they're books that are made for a wider audience. And so when I made this move of moving from the academia to more mainstream spaces of knowledge production, I felt a big relief simply because the academia, as I said, like science and the scientific world, the world of the spheres of knowledge production are ingrained in white supremacy. They're the spheres and they're the spaces that have created the inferiority of non-white bodies. And so when you, as a non-white body, enter these spheres and are trying to produce knowledge, there are a lot of people who are going to discredit your work and delegitimize your presence in a very insidious and implicit way, but nevertheless, they're going to do it. And so when this happened, I just decided to not submit myself to this system and to continue what I was doing outside of it, to not give the institution so much power, basically, over me. And now that I'm out of it, this is when I got offered professorships. And it's like, do you want to be a guest professor at our university? And I'm like, well, had I stayed there, they would never, I would have had to struggle so much to get there. And so it's basically this kind of empowerment for me to just also say no to certain things by leaving and by not investing in recognition, you know, like not wanting to be recognized at all costs. That's empowering, you know, to say, no, I don't need your recognition. You're not going to give it to me anyway, so peace out. And in another way, I feel by, you know, now I'm going back and having fellowships in universities, but I feel so much freedom. You know, what I can say, I'm not going to change myself to fit in their narrow definition of what knowledge is. You know, I'm not going to, you know, do some form of language contortions to speak in the language that they deem appropriate for a researcher, you know, or for a person with a doctor or with a PhD. No, I'm going to speak exactly the same way, and they take it or leave it. I don't need to express myself in a way that is going to give me credit and recognition from dominant groups that have defined the standard of what intelligence is. And yeah, and so that's a process that is very freeing. And I see that the more I gain recognition in the outside, I mean, in outside spheres, the more I have the privilege to do it. And I see it as a privilege because I didn't have that privilege 10 years ago. I had to conform to a certain extent to gain that legitimacy. And so that's not something that everybody can do because, you know, if you had told me to do that 10 years ago, well, yeah, I would have done it and I would just have been excluded. So it means that I had to use a lot of strategy to get to that point, and that this was a lot of labor, you know, a lot of intellectual and emotional labor to get to that point and to know, okay, only the way I dress, you know, for example, dressing a certain way to fit the habitus of the spheres that I'm speaking at and to be recognized as worthy of their attention, you know, something that I don't have to do anymore today. Or, you know, for a very long time, I refrained from wearing head wraps, and I've worn head wraps my entire life since I was a teenager. And I knew in certain spheres I shouldn't wear the head wrap because, you know, there are so many stereotypes and so much bias attached to it that I'm going to make it more difficult for me to be recognized in certain spheres if I wear, you know, traditional dress, for example. And yeah, so that's a constant exercise, and I feel like I think I want to quote a rapper that I admire very much. Her name is oh God, I admire her a lot, and I have like a brain freeze in that moment. I'm going to come back to her. Anyways, and so that person, her name is going to come back. Oh my God, this is this is just yes.
It is for sure.
Kazé, thank God, Kazé is her name, and she's from Martinique, and basically at some point she was invited to one of the biggest universities in France in a very elitist system, and she said, I don't care, like, you're not going to tell me that I'm worthy now because I'm invited to your seminars. And I found that it was in a podcast, I can't remember. She said it so much more, you know, in a more articulate way, and it was more poignant the way she said it. But I admire that so much because it was really being sure of her own value and not needing it to be defined by the oppressor, basically. And I think that's a problem of a lot of marginalized groups. We're still waiting for recognition from the oppressors. That's like a form of trauma bonding. A lot of women are waiting for men to tell them that they're smart. You know, a lot of black people are waiting for white people to tell them that they're beautiful. A lot of, you know, disabled people are waiting for non-disabled people to say, oh, actually, you're able, you're capable, you know, or you're healthy, in a way that two norms that have defined the inferiority of people with disabilities, you know, in an ableist society. And so that's why part of empowerment is to free ourselves from that need for recognition, that need of recognition from people from dominant groups, to say, we don't need white people to tell us we're better. You know, we don't need men to tell us that we're equals. No, we can give us that recognition. We can give us that certainty about our worthiness. And that's something that we need to heal as communities.
I think that's absolutely, I mean, it's so powerful to really have that so articulated, because one of the things that racism does to us, to our communities, is actually imposing a certain stigma and a certain way of seeing yourself. And there is a huge problem with self-stigmatization, also with a sense of inferiority and lack of self-love, really, as communities, as individuals that we have. And I think, you know, it's really difficult to omit the evident. You know, we are sitting here, 3 minority women, 3 mothers. You know, I mean, there is the evident premise of sisterhood in the experience of being a woman and being a woman of minority as well. And for us as Roma, we have been very inspired by the Black feminist movement, for example, in, you know, being able to look forward into, you know, strategies of how we can build communities, how we can build on ourselves, and this premise of sisterhood. And this resonates with actually a quote that I wanted to quote here from Bell Hooks, who is, you know, a huge name in the you know, Black feminist thought, and also in the intersectionality idea. And there is this, you know, theme of love that's ever present in her works. And the quote goes, until Black people and our allies in love and struggle become militant about how we are represented on television, in movies and in books, we will not see imaginative work that offers images of Black characters who love. If love is not present in our imaginations, it will not be there in our lives. And for me, this is so powerful, you know, to really think about how both we need self-love, but also how we need cultural resistance, actually, not necessarily power of politics only, or not only, you know, economic power, or, you know, working through the academia, but actually we need cultural resistance. Do you have ideas or experiences around that sphere of, you know, building self-love and communities, and also using arts and culture, since we are here in ERIAC and the Institution of Arts and Culture?
Yeah, I think this was actually the motivation that I had when I had the idea to write a children's book. Jokesi Club, that you just mentioned in the introduction. Jokesi Club, Jak doe drin, 3 Freundinnen in Berlin, so 3 friends in Berlin. And Jak doe drin, I guess it's self-explanatory. So yeah, because I realized actually that there is no book, no children's book, in German language that actually represents Romani children, and I thought, okay, how is this possible? After like hundreds and hundreds of years, there's not one book that we can hand our children, or that also other children can read as a representation. So I had this in my mind for a long time, and thought, okay, like one day I'm gonna have to do it, just so that it exists and it's out there. So to make a long story short, it exists, it's out there. And also I think it's also a part of, like, you know, claiming that space, but also like the necessity of some kind of a positive representation, because, you know, of course there are books with Romani children, but the representation of how they're being portrayed is not a positive way. It's not a strong character. It's not a character that like acts in a positive way. And this is exactly what lacks and what is needed. So this was actually the motivation to create this book. And yeah, and then of course the idea is like, okay, how is it going to be published? So I was talking to one like really big and very much known distribution company for children's books, And yeah, and then they first were interested, and then decided like, well, no, maybe it's not really something. And I was like, okay, no problem, thank you. I would just do it by myself. So yeah, so that's what I did, and I started my own distribution company, and now it's out there, and it's already the 2nd edition. And of course, I was not the only one, and not only our people realized that there's a lack for this subject, that there's no book out there like this. Also, schools and libraries and museums realized that, yeah, we need this. The children need it, and now they have it. And there have been like so many wonderful readings with children, and it's really, really like a experience that I'm really so thankful for, because when I started to create it, I never thought this was going to happen, that I'm sitting in a library with like 30 or 40, 50 school children, and then all of a sudden you can like watch them, you know, feeling empowered, and then they come and say like, wow, I'm also Romani or something. Oh, I understood something, I understood that, I understood the counting. And just to see that, how this is really like something that, you know, gives like positive vibes to them, and also recognition, and it's part of the school, what they do at school, you know, of that content and all that. I think that's really, really, yeah, important, and yeah, we need much, much more of that. And I also hope that, you know, other people will feel the need to create, yeah, more like also children's books, so that, you know, we have this one book that's in German language, but I think we need much, much more to read, because we need more representation, and also for the younger generation, and we also need more representation, yeah, also for the adult generation, because I think, yeah, this is really something that can have like such a positive effect on the whole community, like to see if there's somebody at a certain spot, or somebody at like as a director or whatever at a company or something like that, to really yeah, to really to see that, okay, this person made it, so I can also make it, right? So this is actually what it says. And at the same time, it also works against the system somehow, and the oppression, you to put like certain people in leading positions who haven't been there before.
I got so deep in your in your words that I can't remember what the question was.
Like, well, it was basically about cultural resistance strategies, of how do you really try to claim back space, and maybe actually, since I have the mic, so I can maybe build on that question, because I'm also inspired by what you're saying. I'm wondering about whether this exercise can also help to forge these alliances that we talked about. So how can we build a broader platform that includes, you know, different communities of people that share similar struggles?
So I think we need to also bridge the hierarchy of spheres, you know. So earlier you said, yeah, even if it's just music. And I said, well, music is everything. I thought music is everything. You know, like music is what keeps us alive many times, you know. And so I think in a capitalistic world, there is what brings money and what doesn't. And we translate it with value. But we need to redefine value. You know, that's like the unpaid work that is done every day by a lot of women at home is invaluable, but because it's unpaid, we consider it to be worthless, right? Or unimportant, or, you know, without status. And so I feel that if we want to bring communities together, if we want to empower communities, if you want to have a systems change that goes beyond just mere identities and visibility, you know, we need to also change the system. Because if we say, okay, now we need more visibility, we need to reclaim space, we buy into the discourse of diversity and inclusion that is very capitalistic in essence, you know, by saying, okay, we need to have more women in the military, we need to have more women in the police, we need to have more women in, you know, boards of directors of big banks. Well, certainly not. We need to question these institutions and possibly abolish them instead of having more women and minorities in them, right? And what we need to do is to question the whole function of our society and understand, okay, why have we come to a point where we give so much weight and so much power to certain institutions, and others are struggling to keep afloat, and they're the first ones to, you know, not receive any funding when we have a pandemic, for example. And so, yeah, it's really about redefining what gives value, what gives joy, what is making us happy, what is like touching us on a soul level. It's certainly not money, right? I mean, yes, it does, because we invest emotionally in money, but you know, like reconnecting with our human essence, reconnecting with what is, you know, spreading love around us, for us. You know, you speak about self-love in communities. This is how we do it. It's not just by trying to redefine our standards by saying, okay, I need to love myself and to consider myself as beautiful as white people. I need to cultivate self-love and, you know, think that, you know, I'm going to make more money to feel more love for myself. So these are adaptation mechanisms that are not transcending, you know, hierarchies, but they're reinforcing them. So what we need to do is completely divest from those systems. And why aren't we doing it? Because it's so difficult. It's so difficult to imagine, or at least to not stay caught up in a world that is given to us as unchangeable. You know, for example, that we live in a world with money, we consider it to be an unchangeable fact. That it's always been like that, and money has always ruled the world, and nothing else is possible. Well, it is. You know, money has not always been there. Money is the source of all our problems, if we look at it, right? If we want to dismantle oppression, we need to rethink money. We need to rethink the role money has in our society, right? Why is it that, you know, certain people have a lot of money and others have literally none? Well, it has to do with our systems of oppression. So we need to rethink this model. And that's not an easy task, because our neurological system is wired in a way that we want to stay with what we know, we want to stay with the familiar. This was our survival mechanism. We don't like change. And so we have a lot of spiritual work to do, because we have come so far as to, you know, be here speaking on a mic, drinking from a glass, wearing clothes. So we can also do that. We have a lot of spiritual work before us that needs to tell us to tame our fears and to allow change, to allow this transformation collectively, irrespective of gender, irrespective of, you know, race or nationality or whatever, but as people, you know, as humanity.
I think it's not only the spiritual, but also the intellectual part that we have to kind of think of what is to come, right? What is the alternative?
I think it's more spiritual. And I insist on this because, you know, if we're staying on the cognitive level of, you know, thinking it through and not, you know, coming into our bodies, you know, on a spiritual and somatic level, change will not happen. Because there's always like some form of, you know, at the cognitive level, we do not connect with our pure essence. And when I say spiritual, I don't mean religious. Many times there's like a conflation of, you know, religion and spirituality. These are two different things. They can be linked, but they don't have to be. You have religious people who are not spiritual, and you have spiritual people who are not religious. Spirituality is nothing more than realizing that we're part of a whole. That any attempt to see us as individuals that are separate from each other, that are acting in our own right, you know, with our own little decisions is wrong. It's not true. So it's really coming to this realization that we're all linked to not only other human beings, but also to the trees outside, to, you know, the birds in the sky. And that's something that happens not on the cognitive level, but really, you know, something much deeper.
I see my team is sending me signs that we have to conclude. I just have one more question before maybe we open for a question or two from the audience, if that's okay. Yes, okay. Just one question, which is trying to reflect more about the structure, since this is also a debate that takes part in the framework of this European project that we have, which really reflects on the idea of anti-Gypsyism, but more broadly on racism, on why we living in a system, and also in times where we see the rise of racism, we see European societies being increasingly closed, increasingly more xenophobic, nationalistic, chauvinistic, you know, really turning with a rapid shift towards the right. So there needs to be, of course, spiritual work, but also somehow maybe some type of a push towards institutions, also of the European Union, that are trying to step up their activities to bring a Europe of equality for all. And if we were to make recommendations as those people at the periphery, but aiming to be at the center where our rightful place is, what could be some of the maybe recommendations or ideas on structural or institutional levels, both at the EU or maybe towards member states, that we could formulate to present to them? What's needed?
How
what's
much
missing?
time do we have?
I mean,
well, I mean, when we talk about like our Romani community, then I mean we all know, but I will still say it, even though we already know it, that there are many people of our community in European countries and also countries close to Europe, non-European countries, that are like struggling and really having like challenging situations because of the oppression that they live in. We all face the oppression, we all face racism, but we're sitting here and I think we're all going to go back home to a probably more or less safe home. But not all of the people of the Romani communities in Europe or countries close to Europe can do that or can say that, right? And I think this is really, really alarming. And this is something that needs to be changed. And this is something that, I cannot really have like, I cannot make it sound better than it is. It is really, really dramatic, and people are living under circumstances that are definitely not okay, that are definitely not human, without, access to electricity, water, and healthy environment, also for children, also for elderly people, for the whole families. And I think this is really something that should be mentioned and should be a subject every time the question comes up with what can we do for the Romani people in Europe. And then in Germany, I think the law of this so-called sichere Herkunftsländer, so certain countries that are supposed to be safe and people are being sent back to those countries. I think this is actually an anti-Romani law, if you ask me, because most of the people that are suffering from this law since years are Romani people. And they are definitely not being sent back to a safe country or a safe place. There are many people, also young people, teenagers or young adults that are being sent back without the parents to a country that is actually foreign to them. They've never been to this place. They don't know what is expecting them. Maybe they probably don't even know the language or whatever. And they are being like they're getting confronted with like really inhuman situations. And I think this is something that really, really, really would have to be changed when we're talking about what should be changed on the European level. And then also when we talk about Germany, then there were also different points that were collected through the study. That actually the German government wanted to have this study, and this was the first study in that kind of field when it comes to the existence of Romani people in Germany, and and many of those conclusions that came out of this study of different studies, there were, I think, together. I'm not sure how many it was, but it was one study that was about racism. It was the biggest one, empowerment, and it was the first time to have a study like this. And the conclusions that were collected after a lot of work, most of them were declined. So it's more decoration, I think, than actually action. And and I think like one of the things that came out of the study was that there should be reparation for those survivors of the genocide that are still alive and it's just a few. I think it was around 80 people or something, and also this was declined. So this, I think, says a lot, and I hope this is not the last question, because I don't want to have it ended like that, but it's still something that really needs to be said, and it really needs to be put out there. That this needs more light. This needs more spotlight on it. This needs more visibility, and this should be, it should be more. It should be more highlighted somehow, and it really is something that really needs to be changed, I think, and improved. And this improvement is something that we can help to make it work by the academic knowledge that we have in our communities. This is how the studies came together. But then the further step will be to make the change, or to make the law, or to change a law. And this is not in our hand anymore. And this is where I have to push the ball back.
So you ask for very concrete measures. So I'm going to build on what you said. So of course there is an issue of survival that is that has directly to do with the line of the human, and basically Roma and Sinti communities continue to be seen as subhuman in Europe. This hasn't changed since 1945. And so there's a need for changing migration policies. We see what Europe can do. We saw after the Russian aggression in the Russian war in Ukraine, how easy it can be for people to pass borders and to be welcomed and to go to schools and to get jobs and to get residency status. Well, it should be expanded to everyone. This is a right. This is a human right. And so first thing. But no, actually, it wasn't enough even for people here in Germany to accept and to realize, we might have a racism problem, or our border policies might be racist. Yeah. No. So I'm like, the denial goes very, very deep. And then second, what needs to be done in order, we have money, right? So first of all, there's like always a discourse, and it's a diversion strategy to say, oh, we don't have funding, we don't have enough money. Money is there, like there's abundance in Europe, right? So that's the first thing. To say that we need to, and even if there were not enough money, there are many ways we could actually liberate that money by stopping the overfunding of the police in our countries, stopping the overfunding of the military, and pouring that money into education, into housing, into health services. We saw during the pandemic that we're not equipped for basically the provision of health services for a whole population. You see that if you need to wait for 3 months for an appointment somewhere, then there's not enough funding. And it's like at that level, you have to wait for an appointment. Eventually you get that appointment. But I'm not even speaking about, basic healthcare. And another thing that can be done is increasing taxes for businesses, increasing taxes on inheritance, even like abolishing inheritance, if you ask me. So there's so many ways we can actually free up budget and budgeting and money to cater for the basic needs of our population, basically. And how do we do that? Because the European Union doesn't agree. And I think there's a problem of discourse and of self-image as well of Europe as, the most, and people will say it, like you would hear people say at the European Commission, we're the highest form of civilization. And you'd be like, okay. People actually say it openly. So this self-image of the superior European Union is coming in the way of all these reforms, of abolishing Frontex, for example, of making sure that our a big reform of border policies and migration and asylum policies. So we need to be open and authentic and honest about what Europe is. The continent of Europe is by no means superior. It is in a superior position right now because it has exploited other continents for many, many centuries, because it has plundered continents in and their people for many centuries, not because of some self-proclaimed superior intelligence or work ethics or whatever. And so that's why, like, shall I say that to the European Commission? Actually, I start to do it, you know, like I'm speaking very openly about this. Like if the European Commission invites me to speak, I would say this. I said this last week, actually, at the Eurocamp Jam or whatever. Like, it's a format where people say a lot of good things about Europe, and I didn't. So I think we need to start being more radical. I think we need more radical moves. Yeah.
Thank you both. I imagine there's some questions from the audience. Please be brave. Ask your questions. No questions? David?
I wanted to ask, before we were talking about the marginalized people and white people, I'm Iranian, I'm coming also, recently I noticed I'm coming from a third country not privileged in the German bureaucracy. Are we still allowed for ourselves to use this kind of vocabulary, or we have to just try to find a new or alternative vocabulary to using?
Instead of what words?
Instead of the marginalized people, marginalized community.
Well, we can change language, but it will always boil down to that. As long as there's a hierarchy, you know, we used to say underprivileged, now it's marginalized. We used to say immigrants, now we say migrants. We used to say refugees, now we say Flüchtlinge, now we say Geflüchtete. It doesn't, I mean, of course it changes something at some points, but since the hierarchy is not shifting, those words are always going to be considered less than. They're always going to be looked down on, right? And so that's why we can, but it's not going to change the hierarchy. And marginalized is a word, I think, that is capturing the meaning of what it means to be pushed to the margins, to be pushed to the side, and to have like some form of barrier that prevents you from entering the center where power is. But yeah, I'm not one of those who say that words matter so much. They do matter, definitely, but they're co-creating a reality. Right? So if we do not achieve that reality, it's not going to change.
Yes?
You both mentioned strategies that work outside of the majority society and also the dominant force of discussion and the dominant mode of the discursive field. And that enables people of marginalized position to also to get recognized and also to give them the initiative, and also to for some reason that's it also gets sucked up in a way and or like incorporated in the eventually by the dominant society in a way that actually it's not just like to create a more diverse and more heterogeneous discussion, but also to take away this power that actually has been already like outside of the field, like what you mentioned, that both of you, that actually then like how your practices also like operate outside of the field, and also that it gave you the power to also define your own terms. But of course, we always see that there's an initiative to try to incorporate these outside forces in a way that's a progressive way, that's a new thing that gets incorporated, and in that way that also always takes away this force. How can I'm not sure whether it's understandable what I'm trying to say, or what could be the ways of counteracting that? That it's always like also a threat in a sense of like the dominant discourse, basically just like taking over of these external sources of discussion, like what you also do.
I think if I understood Gabor well, I think it's also what I take away from your question is how something that operates on the margin or the periphery, or it can be considered counterculture, for example, becomes cool enough for the majority to say, actually, yeah, That's what we should be doing. Yeah?
It's a cooptation, right? So cooptation, yeah. Cooptation of discourses. Well, that's really difficult because those systems are really powerful. Otherwise, we would have dismantled them already. And so that's the same, that's what I was mentioning about inclusion and diversity, right? Saying, okay, now it's being co-opted by capitalism, and it's even strengthening capitalism, because when people see Nike commercials with black people, they're like, you know, that's great. Let's buy Nike. And so I don't know what we can do against that. Instead of, I think what we need to do is remain critical, remain aware, like not let ourselves be manipulated. But it's really difficult because, you know, our struggles are done in such a way that they happen within the confines of these systems, you know, and so anti-racist groups and Black Lives Matter was like also about, so no, actually it was really about police violence and about also abolish the police, abolish prisons. But what was retained from the Black Lives Matter movement was, okay, we need black people everywhere now. And so you have black people on all billboards everywhere, and it gives us the impression, we've overcome racism. You have a flat back femme on a Nike poster, it's all good. And so this systems approach, I think, is necessary in preventing this cooptation, but I don't know if it's going to work, right? Because you need to be alert all the time. You want to say something?
Yeah, I can maybe add a little something to it. I think when we talk about like how can we solve it or how can we dismantle it, or I think it's always gonna be like work, and it's always gonna be uncomfortable, and nobody likes uncomfortable. I mean, I don't know about you, but I don't like uncomfortable. I love comfortable. Like when I come home, I put on my comfortable clothes, and I'm gonna stay in those until I have to go to another event. So I think yeah, and uncomfortable is also can sometimes also be painful. When you come to like certain areas where there's like a border, like when it's like, let's see how can we work against discrimination if it's not about us, even if we are part of a marginalized group, and we think about like our own identity, because not usually we have a certain identity, and not every form of discrimination is going to apply on everybody, right? Sometimes there's like layers, of course, yes, but not all of them. So how do I, and I say I, and you can say I to yourself if you like, how can I deal with discrimination and working against discrimination when it's not about me? This is the part where it gets uncomfortable, but I think this is a really good part, because this is where we change ourselves if we want to, and this is when things can develop, I think. And some might have to do more work because they have more areas where they don't are confronted with discrimination, maybe never, and others have to do less work. But I think everybody has to do like a part or their part.
Yeah, absolutely. Any more questions? Yes, one more.
First of all, I want to thank you for making that happen. There is a voices, and there's such a representation. And secondly, not to dominate, I want to strengthen to what you just said, Emilia, yes? Sorry, about the what I'm taking. Very, very resonating with you, because what I'm coming from the NGOs and institutional, and also I'm a Roma origin, raised in Poland, to give you the context. And I always like this kind of parallel strategies, because we're talking about the strategies, going to the institution, changing law and everything, but when it's coming to awareness, because it's a lack of awareness. And this is something which we are now slowly getting to it, but as an individual, the change needs to come from the individual, and this is what I really resonate, to build the resilience and empowerment, because I was in a lot of different situations when this fight word is not working. You need to understand first what we are, and who is that, and why isn't this not understanding. And this is ideal on me. I know that we need to first resist to go further, but I wanted to just refer to the one event which happened when the war started, and I was involved in helping helping people coming from the border to Berlin, and I'm from Poland, so I know a lot of context what happened on the border, and there was a lot of racism there. That the Ukraine was only the one who were chosen to be helped. There's a lot about it, and it's another branch of the discussion. But what I'm saying that we came with the 3 Pakistani boys here, because I'm calling boys because they were 20, 21. They were a student of medicine in Ukraine. They came here. And we wanted to just give them the shelter. So we wanted to help one of, blah, blah, blah. There was always a procedure. And we came back to the center when there were people hosting POC people, black people. And we were said, no, we can't take it. They are not black. And this something which I cannot accept. And no, I don't care. So if we're talking about the strategies and everything, I would be very, very cautious about what we as a community we're doing. And I'm in lots of different communities, and I think we need to address the trauma we have. And luckily now it's getting more awareness about the trauma, but communities between, they hate each other, they don't like each other, they're fighting each other, and I think we need to start to address it, that it's not easy between the community because there's a lot of unhealed trauma, and until we start addressing this, we won't go further. This is for me. I'm very emotional because this is a very current subject for me. I'm going to the border in a couple of weeks to give the refugee who are dying there as well, still, and it's not spoken about it because of the strategies there, institutions. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for your comment and your question. I think it's really, I think, relevant to this, and maybe this is a good way to end, since we wanted to unite peripheries, right? Why is it that if we have similar struggles, I mean, ultimately similar realities that we share, there have been, somehow competing movements, or maybe not enough trust built, not enough bridges created to really, have a united force for, similar targets, oppressors, the white majority, the system.
I would say it very briefly. So thank you for sharing. This is a typical case of, buying into the systems of the oppressor and reproducing it. Like, I also find that it's completely unacceptable to say to Pakistani students, no, you can't come because you're not black. Yeah, it's a misunderstanding of what supremacy does. Yeah, I would just leave it at that. And I think it's a good conversation that we can have as well after, because that's a never-ending conversation as well. There's no like one point that we can end on.
Tayo, would you like to add?
I think I cannot really add much more to. I mean, I could, but you already said it really good. So yeah.
Well, I guess with this we can conclude. I'd like to thank the audience for being here, for your engaged questions, and most importantly, I'd like to thank both of you, Tayo, Emilia, for finding the time, for joining us for this discussion. And I really hope this is one of many conversations and spaces in which we can, brainstorm together, be critical, but also be hopeful, and create bridges. So thank you
so much.
Thank you. And I would like to invite you now to join us for the opening of the exhibition, Emerging Talents, the Spring Salon. We are very honored to have one of the artists with us, Ornella Rudevich. So we just need a couple of minutes to rearrange the space while we'll be drinking some champagne, I guess. So thank you again, everyone. And Opre Roma for the Roma Resistance Day.